Yeah, all good. All good. Just going for a nice, peaceful, early morning walk, as you do. And the question I was reflecting on was a question yesterday, or at least I noticed yesterday on social media, around is a non-league player closer in standard or level to premiership footballer or a Sunday League player? And a few players sort of got in touch with me, and non-league players said, what are your thoughts? What do you think? And I suppose there's various permutations to take in consideration. It's not a straightforward answer, and I'll explain briefly, in brevity, what I mean. Because the question is Premier League, not just professional football, it's about Premier League. And you've got to think about the Premier League. The Premier League, you've got pretty much the best of the best. Debatably, the Premier League is the most intense, challenging league in the world at the moment. You've got not just the best players in England, you've got the best players, you could argue, in the world. And it's quite intense, week by week. So we all know, for the most part, the Premier League is just, they train exceptionally. They've got the best of the best training facilities, coaches, infrastructure, sports science, preparing mentally. And you've got the best of the best who sort of playing in a league week in, week out. So I think it's worth taking into consideration that. And also I think another thing you've got to take into consideration too, non-league. So you've got different tiers in non-league. Without sort of going into the ins and outs, you've got, for example, the National League Tier 5. So the National League. And a lot of teams in the National League 5, Tier 5, they train professionally. So the aspiration is to get into the League 2, the professional league, the league football. So they are training professionally. And a lot of those players in Tier 5, by the way, they'll have had a taste of professional football in terms of even possibly some of them might have played in Premiership academies or maybe have had a contract in the Premier League, for example. So it's a tough standard, National League 5. And you see them in FA Cup matches, they hold their own against pro teams for the most part. Then, for example, you've got level 6, level 7 and 8, and 9. So as you go down the level, down the tiers of semi-pro football, obviously even in the lower tiers of semi-pro football, they still train, they still do things professionally. At least in my experience, teams will still try and run as professional as they can, but the reality is logistically the players have got jobs, they've got other stuff going on. It's hard to get facilities, they don't have the finance, the infrastructure. So they've all the will in the world. They can do all the right things, but they're sometimes training once a week, maybe twice, maybe sometimes players can't come to train, they've got job commitments. So there's a gap between the Tier 5 of the non-league and obviously sort of the Tier 9, the level 9. So it's worth taking that in consideration. And as we sort of take all that into consideration, I would say that at the higher end of the non-league tier, for example, the high end of the non-league tier, say Tier 5 National League, I would say, because they train professionally, they are closer to Premier League level than they would be the Sunday League. And Sunday League is generally recreational, amateur league. The players aren't training in the sense that they might train during the week for their own sort of personal fitness, but the general is not going to be training from a football perspective. They might meet up the team, we'll do a five-a-side training, a bit of training throughout the week, but as a general consensus, it's recreational. They might stumble in the all hours of the morning on the Saturday, early Sunday morning and turn up to play and then go for a Sunday lunch type thing. So it is recreational, so to speak. So if you took, for example, and you've got to take into consideration player positions too. So if you took like a striker in a National League and put him in the Premier League, with that sort of training, with better players, you could argue around him, he could fit in. Wouldn't be out of place generally. But if you put him in the Sunday League, obviously he doesn't have the same players around him, but he could probably pick up the ball and go around players and score goals type thing. So there is that position specific where you probably wouldn't notice as much in terms of, say, if it was a defender, unless the defender sort of carried the ball out in a Sunday League type thing, or obviously unlikely enough going to get around him, so to speak. But if you put, I suppose, the defender in the Premier League with players around him, depending who he's up against too, then he might fit in too. So it is position. But I'd say as a general rule, let's go with the Tier 5 being closer to the Premier League. As you go down the tiers, I would say if you go down to, say, 6, 7, 8, 9, you get to about, say, 9, I think it starts to get closer, probably line ball, depending on the player, whether it's closer to Sunday League. And some players in the lower tiers of semi-pro, they'll back up the following day and play Sunday League. And I've always, when I've worked in non-league, been against them doing it because they can pick up injuries, the intensity. There's not much to be gained for them doing that. I'd rather after a game on Saturday, Sunday, they do recovery, whatever, swimming, walk, or whatever, rest and recovery, especially if you've got a game again midweek. But the point being, obviously, you've got to take into account that the player at the lower tier, if they've got jobs, they might not even train with the team during the week because they've got work commitments. They might train on their own. Some do, and it's come a long way. Some have got their own personal trainers. Some of the training setups are pretty good. They'll train. But I think it's line ball at that point. But what I would say, there are players in the lower tiers of semi-pro, even around sort of tier 9, that if you put them in a Premier League environment and they're training full-time every day alongside Premier League players, there's a lot of talent there. So I can think of players, even in the lower tiers of semi-pro, if they trained full-time. Absolutely. They could probably fit into Premier League. Yeah, the gap would be obviously still big to a certain degree, but if they're training full-time for a year or so with better players around them, I'm sure in training it could sort of fit in type thing. And then obviously if they ended up going down the Sunday League, it'd be a different dynamic. So I think that's worth considering. But all in all, I've sort of talked about different permutations. I would say the higher end of the tier, like 5, 6-ish, closer to a Premier League stand, like the individual player in terms of fitting in, than non-league. When you start going to the 7, 8, 9, starts drifting away. What I would say is players in the lower tier semi-pro, I would say closer to a professional level than they are Sunday League. So what I would say, if you took a play in the lower tier of semi-pro, they'd be closer to the 5th tier. Absolutely. That the 5th tier, some of the things trained professionally than they are non-league. But obviously the big thing here is the Premier League. It's a Premier League comparison. The Premier League is one of the most toughest, it's not the toughest, most demanding league in the world. We've got the best coaches, best players, all descending from every part of the world. So there is that to take in consideration. And, I suppose the answer to the question, a higher tier, yeah, I would say closer to the Premier League standard for a player. Lower tier starts to get closer to Sunday League, although it would be interesting if the player in the lower tier non-league could train full-time, if they could sort of get close in that direction. But I certainly think that they are closer to professional standard than they are to Sunday League. There's a lot of talented players out there, even in the lower tiers and sort of good setups.